There are a ton of pathetic and depressing franchises that have been plagued with awful management and awful teams over the past couple decades. The Cleveland Browns haven't won more than one game in the playoffs since 1950, and the Lions aren't much better, having not won 2 playoff games since 1957. And in the MLB, the Mariners have made the postseason just 3 times since the year 2000. And in the NHL, yes, there's a franchise more pathetic than the Maple Leafs. It's the Buffalo Sabres.
Just the way that the last little bit's gone, it's it's been embarrassing for us. So.
Since their induction into the NHL in 1970, Buffalo's made the Stanley Cup Final just twice, once in 1975 and once in 1999, which I'll try not to bring up too much for the Sabres fans watching. And besides those 2 Cup Final berths, which, if you couldn't tell, they lost both, they haven't really done much. But before their current 13-year playoff drought, the Sabres were a pretty decent team. 1970 was a huge year for Buffalo sports, and in the 1970 NHL Amateur Draft, the Sabres won the first pick by luck, securing the junior phenom Gilbert Perreault. In their second season, 1971-1972, rookies Rick Martin and René Robert joined Perreault to form the French Connection line, one of the top forward lines throughout the 1970s. After a tough 74 season, the Sabres bounced back in 75, tying the best record in the NHL and reaching the Stanley Cup Finals against the Philadelphia Flyers. The French Connection continued to thrive in the late 70s, joined by 50-goal scorer Danny Gare, but they couldn't return to the finals. The era ended with Robert being traded in 1979 and Martin sustaining a career-ending injury in 1981. All 3 players, Perreault, Martin, and Robert, now have their numbers in the rafters for the Buffalo Sabres. They did have some playoff wins against Montreal in 1983 and Boston in 1993, but mostly faced losses to Boston, Quebec, and Montreal in the first round throughout that time. They also missed the playoffs in 1986 and 87, which was just the 3rd and 4th time in their history. Perreault hit the 500-goal milestone in the 85-86 season and retired after 20 games in the 86-87 season, 17 years after joining the Sabres as their first draft pick in franchise history. The Sabres picked up Pierre Turgeon first overall in the 1987 NHL Draft, and he quickly made an impact, helping the team reach the playoffs in his rookie season. In 1989, Alexander Mogilny joined the Sabres as their first Soviet player to defect the NHL, paving the way for other players. But in a big trade in 1991, the Sabres sent Turgeon to the New York Islanders and brought in Pat LaFontaine. Then the Sabres went out and acquired goaltender Dominik Hasek in 1992 from the Chicago Blackhawks. During the 1997-98 season, the Sabres were in financial trouble, losing $32 million over 3 seasons and almost missing payroll in December of 1997. But in the next season in 1998-99, Miroslav Shatan scored 40 goals, and the team added centers Stu Barnes and Joe Jeannot, and the Sabres made it back to the Stanley Cup Finals, this time against the Dallas Stars, and spoiler alert, they lost. Under coach Lindy Ruff, the Sabres took off in 2005-06, hitting their stride with their best record in over 2 decades. They clinched playoffs for the first time in 5 years with 52 wins and 110 points, setting franchise records left and right, but they lost in the conference finals. And from there, they kinda drifted up until 2012, and then they plummeted. From their induction in 1970 up until the late 2011 season, the Sabres had built a really consistent team year in and year out. In those 40 seasons, they missed the playoffs just 11 times, and when they did make the playoffs, they made it past the first round 15 times. So at the time in 2011, the Sabres were kind of just a mid-team waiting for their big break, and it could not have gone worse for them after that. They have missed the playoffs every single year, resulting in a 13-year playoff drought, tied for the longest out of any major sport in North America. And besides the Kraken and the Golden Knights, for obvious reasons, the Sabres have the least amount of wins in that time. And probably give it 2 more seasons, they'll likely be overtaken by the Knights, despite the Knights joining the league in 2017. The 2012 season saw the Sabres fall just 3 points out of the playoffs, posting a 39, 32, and 11 record for 89 points. In the draft, they picked up future NHLers like Mikhail Grigorenko, Zemgus Girgensons, Jake McCabe, and Linus Ullmark. Yeah, that Linus Ullmark. The next season, the Sabres finished 4th last in the entire Eastern Conference, and of course, they missed the playoffs. This season, though, proved to be pretty pivotal as the Sabres moved towards a rebuild, and that started with the 2013 NHL Draft, where they drafted defenseman Rasmus Ristolainen with their 8th overall selection. Then with the 16th pick, they picked up another defenseman in Nikita Zadorov, and then in the 2nd round, they picked up JT Compher. Both Compher and Zadorov were important pieces in acquiring Ryan O'Reilly down the line, but we'll get to that later. And as the youth movement started in Buffalo, the tanking also started. The Sabres went 21-51-10, which was the worst season since the 2000 Thrashers that posted 14 wins. And despite being the worst team in the league by far, they dropped to the 2nd overall pick in the draft as their divisional opponent, the Florida Panthers, jumped them to select Aaron Ekblad 1st overall. With the 2nd selection, the Sabres picked up Sam Reinhart, a promising goal scorer coming out of the WHL. The late rounds didn't really see the Sabres pick up anyone of value until their last pick of the draft, the 180th overall pick, where they got Victor Olofsson that would end up turning into a solid piece for their roster. The 2014-15 season wasn't much better for the Sabres as they recorded just 23 wins. There weren't many highlights to the season except a somewhat blockbuster trade that they made in February of 2015, where they acquired Evander Kane from the Winnipeg Jets. The full trade ended up being Evander Kane, defenseman Zach Bogosian, and goaltending prospect Jason Kasdorf, in exchange for Sabres defenseman Tyler Myers, winger Drew Stafford, winger Joel Armia, and the rights to Brendan Lemieux, who they picked in the 2014 draft, and a first-round pick in the 2015 NHL draft, which later became Jack Roslovic. Now, this trade didn't really help the Sabres that year as they finished dead last in the league. But they weren't too beat up over that because if any of you remember, the upcoming draft had the next coming of Jesus, Connor McDavid. One of the most hyped prospects ever, and the Sabres had the best odds to get him. Well, odds can only get you so far, as the Oilers jumped both the Coyotes and the Sabres, landing the number 1 overall pick. During the draft, the Sabres made yet another huge trade, bringing in a promising centerman in Ryan O'Reilly. To do so, they traded away Grigorenko, who they drafted in the 1st round of 2012, Nikita Zadorov, who they drafted in the 2013 1st round, and JT Compher, who was drafted in the 2013 2nd round. But they weren't done there. They also traded one of their 1st round picks in exchange for goaltender Robin Lehner. After the Oilers selected McDavid, the Sabres went out and selected Jack Eichel with the 2nd overall pick. A franchise-changing center that the Sabres would be able to build around for years to come, right? The 2015-16 season rolled around and the Sabres improved their 23-win season into 35 wins. I guess that's what happens when you bring in a number 1 center, a goalie, and then draft a top-line prospect. But although they improved, the season didn't really have much to boast about. Eichel had a solid rookie campaign where he scored 24 goals and 56 points, and O'Reilly led them with 60 points in 71 games. The Sabres landed the 8th overall pick and went after Alex Nylander, brother of Willie. Alex was a promising prospect, but as we all know, he didn't really work out in Buffalo. In free agency, the Sabres landed Kyle Oposo and signed him to a 7-year deal, paying him $6 million per. The Sabres once again had a bad season, getting just 33 wins, and then general manager Tim Murray and head coach Dan Bylsma were both fired. They were then replaced by Phil Housley taking over the head coaching role and Jason Botterill taking over as general manager. The one good thing about this season though is that Eichel improved and had 57 points in just 61 games, almost a point per game season. This season also saw Robin Lehner turn into a full-time starter where he posted a .920 save percentage, which was pretty solid. In the offseason, the Sabres traded Tyler Ennis, Marcus Foligno, and a 2018 third rounder for Marco Scandella, a 4th round pick, and the return of Jason Pominville, who previously played in Buffalo. The draft saw the Sabres pick Casey Mittelstadt at 8th overall. With high hockey IQ, good vision, solid hands, and speed to back it all up, Mittelstadt entered the 2017 NHL draft as one of the top North American prospects. And if you watch his junior highlights, he looked filthy, but obviously he's not with Buffalo anymore. Then in the 2nd round, the Sabres got goaltender Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, or UPL, at 54th overall. And before the next season started, the Sabres signed Jack Eichel to a massive 8-year, $80 million contract extension that would go into effect at the start of the 2018-2019 season. The Sabres missed the playoffs again though, finishing last in the division again, and last overall in the league again. Eichel had another solid year of development, putting up a career-high 64 points, and Reinhart showed signs of growth, scoring 25 goals and 50 points. And yet again, they made a blockbuster trade, this time shipping out Evander Kane to San Jose. The Sabres got a 2019 first-round pick, a 2020 fourth, and Daniel O'Regan. At the end of the year, the Sabres signed Olofsson, Mittelstadt, and Luukkonen to entry-level contracts. The horrid season finally rewarded the Sabres with the first overall pick in the 2018 draft, allowing them to select Swedish defenseman Rasmus Dahlin. Once free agency started on July 1st, the Sabres again made a huge trade. They got rid of Ryan O'Reilly and sent him to St. Louis in exchange for Vladimir Sobotka, Patrick Berglund, Tage Thompson, a 2019 first, and a 2021 second. And they weren't done just there. On August 2nd, the Sabres traded prospect Cliff Pu, a 2019 second, a 2020 third, and sixth, in exchange for Jeff Skinner from the Carolina Hurricanes. So the Sabres traded away O'Reilly to let Eichel become the first-line center and brought in Jeff Skinner to add some support around him. It finally looked like they had something going in the Jack Eichel era. But obviously, the 2018-19 season was nothing. The Sabres again had 33 wins, but on the bright side though, Eichel shattered his career highs as he dropped 82 points. Skinner in his first season with the team scored 40 goals, and Dahlin had a solid rookie year, putting up 44 points. In the draft, they selected Dylan Cousins at 7th overall, then a few days later, they signed Jeff Skinner to an 8-year deal worth $9 million per. I guess they saw that 40-goal season with Eichel and wanted to lock him down, but we'll see later that that doesn't really work out how they would have liked. The Sabres would start the 2019-2020 season with a new head coach in Ralph Krueger. The season was shortened due to COVID, meaning that more teams would make the playoffs. Still, with this new exception, the Sabres missed out, being just one of the 8 teams to miss the playoffs that year. Eichel again led the way with 78 points in 68 games, and they also got some secondary goal scoring from Victor Olofsson and Sam Reinhart. The draft lottery would have them selecting 8th overall, where they would select Jack Quinn. They also selected JJ Peterka in the second round. The 2021 season was massive for the Sabres. I mean, they were still horrendous, but they made some moves. For one, they got rid of general manager Jason Botterill and replaced him with Kevin Adams. They also switched from Coach Krueger to Don Granato mid-season, but before the season even started, they went and signed former Hart Trophy winner Taylor Hall to a 1-year deal, hoping he could play alongside Jack Eichel. That didn't go too well, as he was traded that very season along with Curtis Lazar to the Boston Bruins in exchange for Anders Bjork and a second-round pick in the upcoming draft. Trading Hall was likely in part to the Sabres tying the record for the longest losing streak in NHL history at 18 games long. That losing streak helped them finish with the worst record in the league for the 4th time in 8 years, and for the 2nd time in 4 years, they won the draft lottery, allowing them to add Owen Power to their young defensive core. In the offseason, the front office started to blow things up. First, they got rid of former 8th overall pick Rasmus Ristolainen and sent him to Philly in exchange for Robert Hagg, a 2021 first-round pick and a 2023 second-round pick. Then, the very next day, they shipped out 25-year-old Sam Reinhart to the Florida Panthers for goaltending prospect Devin Levi and a 2022 first-round pick. Along with trading both Reinhart and Risto, the Sabres were unable to re-sign Linus Ullmark, allowing him to sign in Boston. And they weren't done just there. Just weeks into the 2021-2022 season, the Sabres traded away their captain and franchise centerpiece to the Vegas Golden Knights. The full trade was Jack Eichel and a 2023 third for Alex Tuch, Peyton Krebs, a 2022 first, and a 2023 second. With that trade, the Sabres hit an all-time low in attendance during the 21-22 season, averaging just 9,900 people per game. The season did have a few highlights though, as hard it is to believe. The Eichel trade allowed Tage Thompson to break out as he had 68 points, and newly acquired Alex Tuch became an instant fan favorite as he was born in Syracuse, just 2 hours outside of Buffalo. And he slotted in nicely with the team, scoring 38 points in 50 games. In the draft, they selected Matthew Savoy at 9th overall, and they also got Noah Ostlund and Yuri Kulich later in that first round. The next year was sort of positive for the Sabres. I mean, for one, they posted their first season above 500 since 2012, going 42-33-7, which had them miss the playoffs by just 1 point. Another highlight was the full breakout season of Tage Thompson. He exploded for 47 goals and 94 points. Alex Tuch had 79 points in 74 games. Rasmus Dahlin had a career-high 73 points, and Jeff Skinner had a great season, putting up 82 points in 79 games, making his $9 million cap hit look a little better, I guess. So statistically, this was the Sabres' best season in over 10 years. The draft was even good as they got Zach Benson at 13th overall. And finally, this brings us to the past season where they finished 7 points out of the playoffs. Statistically, everyone regressed. Tuck and Dahlin were both down to 59 points, Tage was down to 56, and Skinner was all the way down to 46. The only positives that really came are that they locked down both Dahlin and Power to long-term deals to cement their blue line for the future. They were active at the trade deadline as they traded away their former first-round pick Casey Middlestat in a 1-for-1 deal where they got defenseman Bowen Byram in return. In the draft, they drafted Konsta Helenius, who they just signed to an entry-level deal. They also made a very questionable trade with the Oilers where they traded away their 9th overall pick from 2022, Matt Savoy, and in return they didn't really get the same value. They got Ryan McLeod and Tyler Tullio from the Oilers, two young prospects but still kind of a head-scratcher from Kevin Adams. And in addition to that move, they also bought out the remainder of Jeff Skinner's contract, allowing him to sign in Edmonton. So for 13 years straight, the Sabres have essentially made no progress. In that time, they've had 19 first-round draft picks, 8 of which are no longer with the team. They also had several players leave their team and then break out. For instance, O'Reilly left and then won a Stanley Cup and a Conn Smythe with the St. Louis Blues. Eichel left and then won a Stanley Cup with Vegas. Reinhart and Montour left and won a Stanley Cup in Florida. And Ullmark left and won a Vezina with Boston. And that's just a few of the success stories that came out of players leaving Buffalo. The team has had an immense amount of talent come through. They just have no idea how to manage it. But funny enough, the Sabres look the best that they have in years. Next season, they'll have a great forward core with Tage Thompson, Alex Tuch, JJ Peterka, Dylan Cousins, Jason Zucker, and Zach Benson. And they actually have a really solid D-core with Dahlin, Power, Samuelson, and Byram in the top 4. And add that to their tandem of UPL and Devin Levi, they might have a playoff team on their hands. But then again, that's what we've been saying for the past 5 years.
Back and tied it up in the dying, and I mean dying seconds of the second period on Tierney's goal.